I never thought that at 73 I would wake up every morning feeling like my life didn't belong to me. The house that Lydia and I built almost 50 years ago now feels like a stranger's house, even though I'm still part owner. My son Noel and his wife Pearl made it their own long ago, and I've become an inconvenient lodger. This morning, as usual, I was up before everyone else. My old bones won't let me sleep past 6 in the morning. I walk quietly into the kitchen, trying not to squeak the floorboards in the hallway. Pearl hates noise in the morning and never misses an opportunity to remind me of it. He put the kettle on and sat by the window, looking out at the garden that had once been Lydia's pride. The garden is now neglected. Pearl has no interest in gardening, and I've been forbidden to change anything there after I trimmed the hedge wrong. All these little things hurt more than I'm prepared to admit. The kettle boiled and I poured myself a cup of strong black tea without sugar. Lydia had always said that my love of bitter tea reflected my temperament. Perhaps she was right. In nearly 50 years of marriage, she'd gotten to know me better than I'd gotten to know myself. 3 years have passed since she left, and I still talk to her in the morning as if she were sitting across the table. "Good morning, Edward." Pearl's voice snapped me out of my musings. She was standing in the doorway, already fully dressed, with perfect hair and makeup. Even at home, she looked like she was ready for a photo shoot for a country house magazine. "Morning," I replied, trying to fake a smile. "You used the blue mug again," she said, opening the cupboard. We agreed that the blue set was for guests only. I silently stood up and poured the tea into a white mug from the cheap set they'd bought especially for me. "Practicality," Noel said then. "If you break it, it's no shame. A small thing, but every day little things like that add up to an insurmountable mountain." "Noel's late today," Pearl announced, deftly operating the coffee machine. "There's a meeting at the firm. My son works as legal counsel for a big company. Prestigious, lucrative, and not at all what he wanted to do when he was young. He dreamed of music, even played in a band in college. And then I told him something I regret to this day. Music is a hobby, not a profession. You have to think about the future." He listened, went to law school, and now he has everything. Status, money, beautiful wife, everything except the sparkle in his eyes. "Did you remember the cleaning ladies coming in today?" Pearl continued. "Please don't lock yourself in your room like last time. She needs to clean everywhere." "I remember," I nodded. "I'll go to the library and read. The library is the only room in the house where I still feel like the boss." Noelle isn't interested in books, and Pearl considers them dust collectors, so they don't touch my collection. This is where I spend most of my day, rereading old geology journals and monographs. Sometimes I just sit in an armchair, remembering my expeditions. I worked as a geologist for almost 40 years. I traveled halfway around the world, searching for rare mineral deposits and making maps. My work required long trips, and now I realize how much time with my family was irretrievably lost. Lydia never reproached me. She was a saintly woman. Noel, on the other hand, never forgave my absence from the important events of his life. A phone call interrupted my musings. I reluctantly picked up the home phone that Pearl kept on the hallway table. "Edward speaking." "Father, it's me." Noel's voice sounded strained. He rarely calls me directly. He usually relays messages through Pearl. "Is something wrong?" I asked, feeling strangely anxious. "We need to talk," he said. "It's important. I'll be home for dinner, so try not to go anywhere." He hung up without waiting for my response. Typical of our communication. The day dragged on slowly. I tried to read, but my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conversation. What was so important Noelle wanted to discuss? Had they finally decided to move and leave me the house? Or had they found a way to force me out of the house? Pearl had been unusually active all day. She'd been rearranging the living room furniture, talking on the phone in a quiet but excited voice, and double-checking the contents of the oven where a special dish was cooking. It seemed as if they were preparing for the arrival of important guests. By 6 p.m., I heard the front door slam. Noel had returned earlier than usual. A few minutes later, he peeked into the library. "Father, we expect you for dinner in half an hour," he said in a formal tone. "What's going on, Noel?" I asked him bluntly. "Why the mystery?" He paused as if deciding how much to say. "We have news," he said at last. "Important news. We'll discuss it at dinner." Dinner was served with unusual solemnity. Pearl had brought out the finest china and crystal glasses. She'd even lit the candles, though it was still light outside. I sat down in my usual seat, uncomfortable in this festive atmosphere. So, Noel began as we began the main course. We want to talk about the future. Our future, Pearl emphasized with a meaningful smile. We're planning some changes, Noel continued, and they involve the house. I set my fork down, sensing something bad. Pearl's been promoted, he announced proudly. She'd been promoted to marketing director. Congratulations, I said, not sure what that had to do with the house. Thank you, Edward, Pearl smiled. A new position means new opportunities. Noel and I had long dreamed of a more modern place, closer to downtown Jackson. I felt the blood drain from my face. Do you want to sell the house? I asked bluntly. They looked at each other, as if they'd rehearsed this moment. We're considering it, Noel answered cautiously. This house is too big for us, and it needs constant maintenance and repairs. Besides, the neighborhood isn't what it used to be. But it's our family home, I objected. Your mother and I built it for future generations. It's our history. History is fine, Father, Noel said with a strained smile. But you have to look to the future. A modern family needs a modern home. And what about me? I asked the question that had been hanging in the air. There was that exchange of glances again. We found a great place, Pearl said. The Golden Autumn Residence. It's a specialized complex for the elderly. It has excellent facilities, medical staff, a peer community. A nursing home, I translated. You want to send me to a nursing home? Don't say that, Father, Noel said with a wince. It's a modern complex with individual apartments. You'll be better off there than here with us. Admit it, we don't always get along. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him as the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle. The boy whose broken knees I'd bandaged. The boy I'd read about dinosaurs and pirates at bedtime. When did he turn into this cold, calculating man? This house is my life, I said quietly but firmly. I'm not going anywhere. Father, be reasonable. Noel was beginning to lose patience. We've thought this through. Selling the house will allow us to buy a new home and pay for your stay in the residence for many years to come. And my share from the sale of the house? I asked, even though money was the last thing on my mind. Noel sighed with obvious irritation. Let's be honest. When you signed the house over to me after Mom died, we only agreed that you would live here for life. Money was out of the question. Because I thought I was going to live here for the rest of my life. I raised my voice, which rarely happens. Technically, you're not losing anything, Pearl interjected. You're just changing to a place more suitable for your age and condition. My condition is fine, I retorted. I'm not an infirm old man who needs looking after. Not yet, Noel said with pressure. But you're 73, Father. Who knows what will happen in a year or two? I looked at them both and realized that the decision had already been made. They were just putting me on the spot, not even trying to pretend that my opinion meant anything. I'll think about it, I said, rising from the table. My appetite was completely gone. Father, Noel stood up too. We have to decide now. Potential buyers have already expressed interest, and we need an answer by the end of the week. You've already put the house on the market? I couldn't believe my ears. Without even consulting me? We were just researching the market, Pearl explained hastily. Preliminary consultations with a realtor. And what did the realtor say? I asked bitterly. How soon can you get rid of your old house and your old father? Don't be dramatic, please, Noel rolled his eyes. We're trying to find a solution that will suit everyone. No, son, I shook my head. You're trying to find a solution that suits you. No one is asking me what I want. With these words, I left the dining room, leaving them to discuss my fate without me. In the library, I sat down in a chair and looked for a long time at the picture of Lydia, which I always kept on the table. What would you do, dear? I mentally asked her. Lydia always had a knack for smoothing over conflicts, finding compromises. She was our family's peacemaker. With her passing, all the connecting threads were severed. I knew this was only the beginning. Noelle wouldn't back down, especially if Pearl was determined to move. They'd find a way to force me out of the house, even if they had to resort to legal tricks to do it. After all, my son is an excellent lawyer. I'm not giving up without a fight, I decided, looking at the picture of my wife. In her eyes, even in the snapshot, I could read approval. Lydia had always said that a man should preserve his dignity to the end, to meet old age with his head held high. And I wasn't about to disappoint her. The next morning I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. The night had brought little rest. I tossed and turned, going over my options in my head, but none seemed to work. As I left the bedroom, I immediately heard muffled voices from the kitchen. Noelle and Pearl were unaware of my approach, and I slowed down, listening. Next month at the latest, Noel was saying. Brill says if we delay, we'll lose those buyers. They're willing to pay 10% above market. What about your father? Pearl asked. I don't think he'll agree to move into the residence. He'll have to. I was startled by the harshness in my son's voice. He has no choice. The house is legally mine. If he wasn't so stubborn, we could find a compromise. But you know my father. He always thinks he's right. Golden Autumn has really good conditions, Pearl continued. Your father will realize that when he sees it. And if he doesn't, well, he doesn't have any other options. He can rent an apartment with the rest of his savings if he's so against the residence. Noel shrugged. That's his choice. But either way, he can't stay in this house. I'm willing to pay for the first 6 months at Golden Autumn and then let him decide for himself. Their words hit me squarely in the solar plexus. I leaned against the wall, feeling my old legs getting weaker. 6 months of alms is the price of my life for my son. Brill's already found us a great apartment downtown. Pearl's voice sounded excited. Panoramic windows, underground parking, concierge. Just what we'd always dreamed of. And no creaking floorboards, no leaky pipes, no old wiring, Noel added. And most importantly, no ghosts of the past. A new beginning. Do you think you can convince your father by the end of the week? Pearl asked. We'll have to. I could hear the irritation in Noel's voice. At the very least, we'd have to face the fact. He'd taken over my life for too long, and now it was my turn. I went quietly back to my room, unable to face them after what I'd heard. Everything inside was churning with resentment and anger. When did my son turn into this callous, calculating man? Where was that boy who used to hug me when I returned from expeditions and ask me what new stones I had brought back? All day I avoided socializing, citing a headache. I locked myself in the library, going through old photo albums. The only thing that still connected me to the past. The pictures showed Noel at different ages. Here he was 5, sitting on my shoulders. Here he was 10, proudly holding his first self-caught catch. Here he was 17, standing with a guitar on the school stage. There was life in his eyes then, passion. When did everything change? Maybe when I insisted on law school instead of music school. Or when I missed his graduation because of an expedition to South America? Going through the photos, I came across an envelope I hadn't opened in a while. It contained a letter Noel had written during his freshman year of college. I know I disappointed you, Father, by choosing law over geology, but I want you to be proud of me. One day I'll build my own house, and there will always be room in it for you and Mom. Bitter irony. Now he will have a new house, but no room in it for me. In the evening, when I finally went out for dinner, the atmosphere was tense. Noel and Pearl were clearly expecting a response to yesterday's proposal, but I decided to take my time. You were right about the stock market, Noel said suddenly, trying to start a casual conversation. My investments in the technology sector are up 15%. I'm glad my advice was useful, I said, sipping my water. You usually think my ideas are outdated, though. Pearl gave him a warning glance. Edward, she began in a honeyed voice, we were hoping to hear your thoughts on the Golden Autumn residence. Why don't we go there this weekend and check it out? I set my fork aside and looked her straight in the eye. I've lived in this house for 48 years. Noel was born here. This is where Lydia died. Every corner holds memories. And you want me to trade that for a sterile room in a nursing home? In a residence, Father, Noel corrected. And it's not a sterile room. It's a full apartment with all the amenities. With nurse supervision and a regimen like a boarding house, I countered. With qualified medical staff, Noel explained patiently, like a child. Given your age, that's an advantage, not a disadvantage. My age doesn't make me incapacitated. I felt a wave of anger rising. I've made my own decisions all my life, and I won't let you control my fate. Father, Noel was beginning to lose patience. Let's be realistic. The house is too big for the 3 of us. Its upkeep eats up a significant portion of the budget. Pearl was offered a promotion, but the office is downtown. It's unsustainable to spend 2 hours commuting every day. Then I'll stay here alone, I suggested. Or I could get an apartment closer to the center, if you're so insistent on selling. They looked at each other again, as if I'd said something ridiculous. You can't live alone, Father. Noel shook his head. Remember last year when you forgot to turn off the stove? Or the time you fell in the bathtub? If we hadn't been around... One time I forgot to turn off the stove, I interrupted. Once in 73 years. And people fall at any age. But the consequences are more serious with age, Pearl argued. We're worried about you, Edward. You'll be taken care of at the residence, and we can visit you more often if we live downtown. I almost laughed. They'd visited me in my room a couple times in the last year or so. What would change if I was in a different building? I know you've already made up your mind, I said tiredly, and you've found buyers for the house, and you've looked for a new apartment. You're just putting me on the spot. There was a look of surprise on both their faces. Where did you? Pearl began, but Noel stopped her with a gesture. I heard all about it this morning, I admitted. About the above-market buyers. The new apartments with the panoramic windows, 6 months of paid residency, and then it's as good as it gets. Noel turned red with anger. Were you eavesdropping? He asked, raising his voice. I was about to have breakfast, but I didn't want to interrupt your fascinating conversation about my future, I replied bitterly. That's not fair, Father. You're taking things out of context. What did I misunderstand? I asked. Aren't you planning to sell the house soon? Haven't you already found a new place to live? Aren't you going to put me in a nursing home regardless of my wishes? Residence, Pearl corrected herself, but she faltered under my gaze. It's not just about the house, Father. Noel tried to change tactics. It's about the quality of life, yours and ours. Pearl and I want to grow, build our careers, and worrying about you all the time? Don't worry, I interrupted. I'm old enough to take care of myself. You don't understand, Noel slapped his palm on the table. We can't leave you. You're my responsibility. But that doesn't mean we have to sacrifice our plans. Do I have to? I asked quietly. There was a heavy silence. We have no choice, Father, Noel said at last. The house will be sold. We have until the end of the month to vacate it. You can either move to Golden Autumn, where they'll take care of you, or... He hesitated, or find another solution, but we won't let you live alone. We won't? I felt my hands tremble. You're forbidding me to live on my own. I'm worried about you, Noel was almost shouting. Why do you always see me as the enemy? I just want you to be safe. Safe and away from you, I added. It's not fair, Father. Noel stood up from the table. We're offering the best option available. If you hate the idea of a residence so much, offer an alternative, but consider our circumstances. I need time to think, I said, rising as well. Not all decisions are made in one evening. You have 3 days, Noel cut him off. I have to give an answer to the buyers on Friday. With that, he left the dining room, and Pearl hurried after him, leaving me alone in the midst of the uneaten dinner. I returned to the library and sat for a long time in the dark, looking out of the window at the garden, which now looked ghostly in the moonlight. It had grown feral over the year without Lydia's caring hands, but it still held the shape she had set. A hedge, an arbor with curly roses, an alpine slide with rare mountain plants I'd brought back from expeditions. What am I going to do, Lydia? I asked mentally, as I always did in difficult moments. There was no answer, only silence and moonlight outlining the familiar silhouettes of the garden. I sat like that until well into the night, going over my options. Humiliating submission and moving to Golden Autumn. A rented apartment with my remaining savings, which wouldn't last long. Trying to challenge the sale of the house through the courts, which is nearly impossible, considering I'd signed it over to Noel myself after Lydia's death. My gaze fell on an old frame map, a geologic map I'd made on one of my first expeditions. I'd been enthusiastic then, full of faith in the future. I believed I was building not only a career, but a legacy for my family. And the result is a son who sees no place for me in his life. The next morning, I deliberately got up later so I wouldn't cross paths with Noel before he left for work. Pearl was gone too. She had a yoga class on Wednesdays and meetings with her friends. The house was unusually quiet and empty. I made myself a cup of tea, this time in a forbidding blue mug, and went out into the garden. For the first time in a long time, I dared to break the unspoken rule not to touch the garden without Pearl's permission. I found an old pair of garden shears in the shed and began to trim the overgrown bushes. The physical work helped clear his mind. With each dry shoot cut, it was as if I was cutting away some of my doubts. By noon, when the sun was at its zenith, I knew what I had to do. Back at the house, the first thing I did was check the mail. Among the bills and advertising brochures lay a letter from my old friend and colleague, Ambrose Nightingale. We hadn't seen each other for several years, but we kept up a correspondence. Ambrose lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Jackson after his wife died. He had no children, only nephews with whom he rarely socialized. In the letter, Ambrose talked about his life, his new hobby of wood carving, and his plans to visit his brother in Oregon. At the end, as usual, he invited me to stop by for a visit, anytime. It felt like a sign. I immediately wrote back, briefly outlining my situation and asking if I could stay with him for a few days while I looked for another solution. Sealed the envelope and immediately went out to mail it. The walk to the post office took almost an hour, but I didn't regret it. I needed the movement, the air, the freedom. Once back home, I started making a plan. The first order of business was to unpack. For almost 50 years, this house had accumulated a huge amount of items, documents, photos. What to take with me? What would be stored? What would have to be discarded? I started with the library, my sanctuary. I carefully went through the books, deciding the fate of each one. Scientific monographs, mineral atlases, geological reference books, my faithful companions for decades. Many would have to be left behind, but I would take the most valuable ones. In one of the cabinets, behind the rows of books, I found a forgotten box. It contained samples of minerals and semi-precious stones that I had collected over the years for my collection. Some of the specimens were quite rare and valuable. I went through them, remembering where and under what circumstances each had been found. Here was an amethyst from Brazil, my first independent expedition. Lydia was so proud when I returned with success. Here's malachite from the Urals, a trip during which I missed Noel's 10th birthday. He didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after I returned. Here's turquoise from Arizona, the last expedition before I retired. I didn't hear the front door open. I was only awakened from my recollection when Pearl appeared in the library doorway. "Edward, what are you doing?" She was staring in amazement at the books and the collection of rocks. "I'm unpacking," I answered calmly. "If I'm going to have to move, I need to figure out what to take with me." "Are you agree to Golden Autumn?" Her voice sounded distrustful. "I didn't say that," I shook my head. "I'm just accepting the inevitable. I'm going to have to leave this house. I haven't decided where I'm going." Pearl shifted unsteadily from foot to foot. "Noel will be glad you've accepted it," she said at last. "It's the right thing to do, Edward. It's not safe to live alone at your age." I nodded, not wanting to continue this conversation. Pearl stood for a moment, then left, clearly pleased by my seeming submission. In the evening, when Noel returned from work, I expected a continuation of yesterday's conversation. But when he saw my preparations to leave, he nodded curtly and locked himself in his office. Apparently, Pearl had already informed him of my surrender. At dinner, the atmosphere was almost friendly. Noel was talking about things in the office. Pearl was discussing plans for updating her closet. They talked about the new apartments, about the prospects that would open up with the move downtown. They mentioned me in passing, as if I were already a ghost in the house. "Father," Noel finally said to me as dinner drew to a close, "I'm glad you've made the right decision. Believe me, it's the best thing for everyone." I stared at my son in silence, trying to see him as the boy I'd once loved more than life. But in front of me sat a stranger, successful, confident in his rightness, and completely indifferent to my feelings. "I haven't said my last word yet," I said quietly. "Give me the promised 3 days." The days that remained until Friday dragged painfully slowly. I continued to sort through my things, sorting through my papers, packing my most precious possessions. Noel took this as a sign that I agreed with their plans, and even became a little more friendly. Pearl had ordered a Golden Autumn brochure for me and left it on the table in my room. I did not touch it. There was no letter from Ambrose, but that didn't bother me. Mail is sometimes delayed, and I was sure my old friend would not refuse to help. Thursday afternoon, I went down to the first floor and heard Pearl talking on the telephone in the parlor. The door was ajar and her voice came clearly down the hall. Yes, he took it better than we expected, she was saying. Already he's packing his things. Of course, we'll apply for Golden Autumn on Monday. No, he hasn't seen the new apartment. We thought it would be better to finalize the sale of the house first. Of course, he'll stay with us until the paperwork is finalized. No, Noel is adamant. No compensation, except for the first months in the residence. He already got the right to live in the house for 3 years after Lydia's death. I quietly stepped away from the door, feeling everything inside clench with resentment. He got the right to live in the house I built, in which my whole life has been spent. They talk about me like a tenant whose lease has expired, like an uncomfortable piece of furniture that it's time to get rid of. In the evening, when Noel returned from work, I noticed he was in high spirits. At dinner, he even offered to open a bottle of wine to celebrate a new phase in his life. I declined, citing a headache. Father, Noel filled Pearl's glass, then his own. I've contacted the Golden Autumn administration. They're ready to take you in starting next month. Great suite on the second floor, overlooking the park. Best in the residence. I haven't agreed to Golden Autumn yet, I reminded him. Noel's smile became strained. But you realize it's the best option. He tried to speak patiently. We can't let you live alone, and we won't be able to get you into a new apartment. Why not? I asked. Won't there be a guest room? Pearl let out a nervous laugh. Edward, we'll be living downtown. It's a different layout, a different way of life. A 2-bedroom apartment is a luxury, and we need an office for Noel too. I understand, I nodded. Luxury, like taking care of an elderly father. Don't start, please, Noel grimaced. We're offering the best option we can. Best for who? I asked. For everyone, Noel said. I'm meeting with the buyers tomorrow. They want to look at the house again before signing the papers. It would be nice if you weren't home at that time. So that's it. They want to hide me so they don't scare off potential buyers. So they don't see the old furniture that has to be moved out before they move in. I'll be in the library, I said, rising from the table. I promise not to show my face to your guests. Father, Noel was clearly uncomfortable. You misunderstood. It's just that they will be asking questions, looking through all the rooms, and my presence will get in the way. I finished for him. Don't worry, son. I understand perfectly well. That night I hardly slept at all. I lay staring at the ceiling and thought about how quickly the life I had built over decades was falling apart. A week ago, I had a home, a family of some sort. Now I was on the verge of being completely alone. When I came down for breakfast this morning, Noel had already left, telling Pearl he'd stop by for lunch with the customers. Pearl was unusually obliging, even offering to make me scrambled eggs instead of the usual toast. I declined, confining myself to tea. I'm meeting some friends today, she said, clearing the table. I'll be back for lunch in time for Noel and his customers. Are you sure you don't want to be gone that long? Why don't you take a walk in the park? I'd feel more comfortable in the library, I answered. Don't worry, I won't scare your guests with my appearance. Pearl rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. Half an hour later she left, and I was alone in the house that would soon no longer be mine. I sat in a chair in the library for a long time, leafing through an old geologic atlas, but not seeing a line. My mind was spinning with scraps of conversations with Noel, memories of the past, thoughts of an uncertain future. Where would I be in a month? In the sterile room of the Golden Autumn, or at Ambrose's if he agreed to take me in? And then what? You can't live on a geologist's pension, especially on rent. My thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the telephone. I got up reluctantly and walked over to the receiver in the hallway. Edward speaking. Edward, this is Brill Harper, the realtor. My clients and I are on our way to your house. Noel asked me to give you a heads up. I looked at my watch. It was only 11, 2 hours earlier than the agreed time. Does Noel know you're coming early? I asked, feeling a muffled irritation rising inside me. Of course, the realtor answered cheerfully. He said he'd meet us there. He'd already left the office. So they made the arrangements ahead of time. They gave me a different time so I wouldn't interfere with the inspection. Okay, I said and hung up. I went back to the library and began to quickly collect the most valuable books and documents. Then I went up to the bedroom and pulled a small suitcase out of the closet, which was already half packed. I added a couple changes of underwear, shaving supplies, and medicine. In the bottom drawer of the dresser, I found an old velvet box with cufflinks, a gift from Lydia for our 20th wedding anniversary. I put it in my pocket. Going downstairs, I went into the kitchen and left a short note. I decided to take your advice and go for a walk. I'll be back tonight. Edward. Let them think I was just out for a walk. Leaving the house through the back door, I headed for the garage where my old Ford was parked. I've rarely used the car in recent years, mostly for trips to the supermarket or the doctor's office. Noel had offered to sell it several times, arguing that it was dangerous to drive at your age, but I'd refused, and now it was the right time to make that decision. I loaded my suitcase and a box of books into the trunk, got behind the wheel and started the engine. I drove quietly out of the yard through the side gate, which was rarely used. On the street, he turned in the opposite direction from the center and only then exhaled. Now it was up to me to decide where to go. The first thing I did was head for the post office. I had to see if there was a reply from Ambrose. To my relief, the letter came. The old friend wrote that he would be happy to have me even today and that he had plenty of room for another grumpy old man. It was exactly what I had hoped for. The next stop was the bank. I had withdrawn almost all of my savings from the account, leaving the bare minimum for unexpected expenses. It was better to have the money on me. Who knows what Noelle would pull when she discovered my disappearance. I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to freeze my accounts under the pretext of taking care of my incapacitated father. By 3 in the afternoon, I was pulling up to Ambrose's house in a quiet suburb of Jackson. His small one-story house with its well-tended garden looked cozy and welcoming. Ambrose stepped out onto the porch as soon as he heard the sound of a car pulling up. "Eddie, you old devil!" He was smiling broadly, though I could see he'd lost weight and gauntness since the last time I'd seen him. "Running away from your insufferable sister-in-law?" We hugged, and I felt the tension of the last few days release a little. Ambrose always had a way of creating an air of ease, even in the most difficult situations. "More from his ungrateful son," I answered. "Well, come in and tell me," he said, helping me with my suitcase. I had just put the kettle on. "And don't look at me like that. I have something stronger if the situation calls for it." Ambrose's house was smaller than mine, but it was in perfect order. After his wife's death, he'd learned to manage his household, unlike me, who'd relied on Lydia for everything. Over a cup of strong tea and a shot of brandy as the situation demanded, I told him everything that had happened in the last week. About Noel's plans to sell the house, about Golden Autumn, about overheard conversations and today's ploy to change the time of the house inspection. Ambrose listened attentively, occasionally shaking his head or clucking his tongue in indignation. "What do you plan to do next?" he asked when I finished my story. "You can stay here as long as you want, but that's not a solution." "I don't know," I admitted. "At first I just wanted to wait here for a few days and then maybe get an apartment, but I don't have enough money saved for that long. And going back to Noel—" "Don't even think about it!" Ambrose pounded his palm on the table. "After such a betrayal?" "You deserve better, my friend." We talked late into the evening, going over our options. Ambrose had suggested we go to a lawyer and try to contest the sale of the house, but I knew it was a long shot. I'd voluntarily signed the house over to Noel, retaining only the right of lifetime residence, which could be circumvented in any number of ways. It was past 9 p.m. when the phone rang. Ambrose picked up the receiver, and to my surprise, after a brief, "Yes, he's here," he handed it to me. "Noel," he whispered. I picked up the phone with a heavy heart. Of course he'd called Ambrose. It was the most obvious place to find me. "Yes, Noel." "Father!" My son's voice sounded agitated. "Where are you? We're going crazy. We came home and you were gone. Just a note about some outing. It's 9 o'clock at night." "I'm at Ambrose's," I answered calmly, "and I'm going to stay here for a while." "What?" Noel sounded genuinely surprised. "Why? You don't have facilities. Ambrose lives alone. He doesn't have medical help around." "I'm fine with that," I interrupted. "Unlike your plan to send me to Golden Autumn." There was a pause. "Father," Noel's voice grew harsher, "you can't just leave. We have an agreement with the buyers, with Golden Autumn. The paperwork is almost done. Your arrangements don't concern me, I replied. I didn't agree to sell or to move into the residence. You've decided everything for me. Because you're incapable of making a rational decision, Noel was almost shouting. You're 73 years old, father. You can't live alone. You can't burden your friend either. Ambrose suggested it, I said. And I'm not a burden. I'm in good health. It's a temporary solution, and you know it. Noel tried to speak calmly again. So, come home, and we'll talk about it. I promise I'll listen to what you want. Like you listened when I told you I didn't want to go to Golden Autumn? I grinned. No, Noel. This time I'm making the decision myself, and I'm not going back. Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be. I heard a pleading tone in my son's voice. The buyers have already put down a deposit. If this deal falls through, you won't get your panoramic windows and your underground parking garage? I finished it for him. That's a shame. That's not fair. Is it fair to kick your father out of his own house? I asked. Is it fair to lie about when customers are coming in, so I'm out of the way? Noel was silent, clearly not expecting me to know about their maneuver. Dad, look, he finally said. I understand that you're upset, but let's deal with this like adults. Come home and we'll find a compromise. A compromise was possible a week ago, I replied, when you first started talking about selling the house. Now it's too late. What are you suggesting? Stay in Ambrose's house forever? That's ridiculous. I'm suggesting you respect my decision, I said. Like I respected yours when you gave up your music career for law. Like I respected when you married Pearl, even though Mom and I didn't think she was right for you. Leave Pearl out of this. Noel was getting angry again. And don't compare those situations to this one. It was about my life then, and now it's about your safety. My life, son, I corrected him, and it's up to me to decide how I live it. All right, Noel was almost shouting. Stay with your friend, but don't come to me when you need help. Don't worry, I said quietly. I won't. The conversation was over. I handed the phone back to Ambrose, feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I hadn't let Noel manipulate me. It was painful but necessary. Shall we have another drink? Ambrose suggested, putting the phone back where it belonged. To independence in old age. To independence, I agreed, raising my glass. That night I slept in Ambrose's guest room. The bed was uncomfortable, the mattress too soft, the pillow too high. But I wouldn't trade that night for my familiar room at Noel's house, where cold stares and disparaging remarks greeted me every morning. In the morning, Ambrose had made breakfast of eggs and bacon and toast, much better than Pearl's. You could really stay here, he said, pouring coffee for me. It's a big house and I'm bored alone. We can split the expenses together and it'll be easier on both of us. I don't want to be a burden. I shook my head. What burden? Ambrose snorted. Two old men who can still take care of themselves. It's more fun together. I considered his offer. It made sense. They were both single, both retired, with shared memories and interests. And yet something was stopping me. Let's decide in a week, I suggested. I needed time to think it over. Ambrose nodded, not insisting. He'd always respected privacy. The day passed in a flurry of activity. We went grocery shopping. Then Ambrose showed me his woodwork in the garage that had been turned into a workshop. He had really discovered a talent for wood carving. Toward evening, Noel called again. This time I refused to come to the phone. Ambrose spoke to him and told me that his son insisted on seeing him. He says he's coming tomorrow, Ambrose informed me. He said he wanted to discuss it calmly. Calmly, I repeated bitterly. He thinks I'm a fractious child who has thrown a tantrum and now needs to be soothed and reasoned with. Do you think otherwise, I wondered. Maybe Noel was right about something. Maybe I am being selfish by refusing to accept the inevitable. The house will be sold anyway. Noel has every right to do so. Golden Autumn might not be the worst option for someone my age. But then I remembered their conversations behind my back, the calculated plans, the lies, and the resolve returned. Tell him I'm not ready for a meeting, I replied to Ambrose. Tell him to give me time. What if he comes anyway? Then I won't leave the room, Ambrose grinned. It's like kindergarten, but I understand and support you. He deserves to be treated that way. Later that evening, as we sat in the living room with glasses of whiskey, the conversation returned to my future. What will you do if you don't stay with me? Ambrose asked. I was silent for a long time, staring at the amber liquid in my glass. I don't know, I finally admitted. For the first time in years, I didn't have a plan. All my life, I've known what would happen tomorrow, in a month, in a year. And now, total uncertainty. And how does it feel? Strange. I took a sip of whiskey, savoring the warmth spreading through my body. Scary and free at the same time. Ambrose nodded understandingly. When Martha died, I felt the same way. It was as if the thread that bound me to my life had been severed. I was desperate, but gradually I realized it was a chance to start something new. Such chances are rare at our age. I looked at my old friend and thought that perhaps he was wiser than I was. After Lydia's death, I clung to the past, to the house, to memories, even to my complicated relationship with my son. Maybe it was time to let go? What if I just leave? I said out loud the thought that had been running through my head all day. Somewhere far away. Start over. At 73? Ambrose grinned, but not mockingly. Why not? My brother moved to Mexico at 65, bought a house by the ocean, married a local beauty, said it was the best decision of his life. I don't have the money for a house by the ocean, I smiled, but the thought is tempting. What about that mineral collection you showed me? Ambrose asked. Some of the specimens look valuable. I nodded. Yes, there are some rare specimens in there. I've been collecting them for years. So why not sell them? It could be your seed money for a new life. I thought about it. The collection did have value, and I hadn't added to it in a long time. It would be sad to part with it, but maybe it was a symbolic step to let go of the past in order to move forward. I'll think about it, I said, finishing my whiskey. That night I dreamed of Lydia. We were sitting in the garden of our house, and she was smiling at me as she had when I was young. Don't hold on to the rocks, Eddie, she said in my dream. They're heavy. Let go. I woke up at first light with a clear understanding of what I had to do. Life at Ambrose was getting better. Within a week, I'd settled into the guest room, setting up the few things I had, creating a semblance of my own corner. Ambrose didn't mind when I rearranged the furniture and hung Lydia's picture on the wall. Your house is your rules, even if it's just one room, he said. Noel called daily, but I refused to talk to him. Ambrose relayed to me the content of the conversations. My son demanded I return, threatened legal consequences, then pleaded, citing concern for my health. The deal with the buyers of the house hung in the balance. They refused to sign the final papers until my residency was clear. I felt sorry for Noel, but not enough to go back. On the 10th day of my stay with Ambrose, as we were having breakfast on the veranda, enjoying a rare sunny morning, a car pulled up in front of the house. I recognized Noel's silver Lexus immediately. Your son's here, Ambrose said, getting up from the table. Do you want me to tell him you're not here? No, I shook my head. It's time to talk. He's not going to let up anyway. Ambrose nodded and went to open the door. I sat on the veranda staring out at the garden. My heart was beating more than usual, but I was calm. I'd thought about a lot of things these days, and I'd made up my mind. Father, Noel appeared on the veranda doorstep. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. You finally agreed to talk. Have a seat, I pointed to the chair across from him. Coffee? No, thank you. He sat down, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. Father, this can't go on. You have to come home. Why? I asked calmly. The house is sold, isn't it? Noel hesitated. Not quite. The buyers insist on meeting with you. They want to make sure you're really okay with moving to Golden Autumn. Apparently, they're afraid of legal problems in the future. I chuckled. Smart people. What did you tell them? That you're temporarily staying with a friend while we prepare the residency papers? Noel looked embarrassed. Dad, please. I understand that you're upset, but let's solve problems like adults. I am, I replied. An adult has the right to decide for himself where and how to live. I chose not to go back. But where will you go? Noel sounded genuinely misunderstood. You can't stay at Ambrose's forever. You can't afford to rent a place to live. Golden Autumn is the best option, and you know it. There are other options, I said, taking a sip of cold coffee. Like what? Noel raised an eyebrow skeptically. I've decided to sell my mineral collection, I announced, and use the money to start a new life. Your collection? Noel looked at me in surprise. The one you've been collecting all your life? Is it that valuable? More valuable than you think. I nodded. Some of the specimens are unique. I've already contacted an appraiser, an old colleague from the Geological Society. He'll be here one of these days. Noel looked stunned. He'd never been interested in my collection, thinking it was just a bunch of rocks. What do you plan to do with the money? He finally asked. Buy a house? At your age? No, I shook my head. Maybe get a small apartment. Maybe leave Jackson. I haven't decided yet. You're leaving? Noel's voice sounded worried now. Where? I don't know, I shrugged. Arizona, maybe. I've always liked the climate. Noel was silent, digesting the information. I could see the gears in his head turning, calculating the options. Father, he finally said, I understand your desire for independence, but you have to be realistic. Even if the collection brings in good money, it will only last for a limited time. And then what? Then there will be a later, I answered. I've lived a long life. I've learned to cope with difficulties, and I have a pension. Barely enough to pay the rent, Noel objected. What about medical expenses? What about household needs? I'll manage somehow. I felt myself getting annoyed. After all, it was my life and my choice. Noel sighed. I just want you to be safe, Father. Golden Autumn guarantees that. I'm willing to pay for you to stay there. To get rid of the guilt? I asked bluntly. Noel's face froze. No, because I care about you like you cared about me. Caring looks different, son, I said softly. It's not coercion or manipulation. It's respecting another person's choices. Even if that choice might lead to trouble? Noel raised his voice. What if you get sick? What if you run out of money sooner than you think? What then? Then I'll deal with it, I replied, like I've dealt with every problem in my life. And no, I'm not coming to you for help. Don't worry. Noel jumped up from his chair. You're insufferable, he exclaimed. You stubborn, ungrateful old man. I try to help you, and you reject everything I offer. That's because you don't offer, but impose, I replied, remaining calm. You don't ask me what I want. You decide for me because you think you know best. Didn't you do the same thing to me? Noel asked, his voice trembling. Shucks him. Didn't you decide that music wasn't serious? Didn't you insist I go to law school? I remained silent, realizing he was right. I had really guided his life, thinking I knew what was best. Yes, I finally said, and now I see that I was wrong. I should have honored your choice, your dream. I'm sorry about that, Noel. He froze, clearly not expecting that answer. You're, apologize? Yes, I nodded. And I hope you don't make the same mistake I did. Don't force your decision on me. Let me choose my own path. Noel slowly sank back into his chair. His shoulders slumped. I don't know what to do, Father, he admitted. I can't just leave you, and I can't make you come back. You can respect my decision, I said, and let me live my life as I see fit, even if you don't agree with it. We sat in silence for a long time. Somewhere in the garden, birds chirped and the wind rustled the leaves. I looked at my son and saw in him the boy I had once taught to ride a bicycle. A boy who was afraid to fall, but still tried again and again. The buyers are backing out of the deal, Noel finally said. Without guarantees that you won't be in legal trouble, they don't want to take any chances. It's a shame, I said sincerely. I know how much you and Pearl dreamed of that apartment downtown. Noel shook his head. It's not about the apartments, Father. It's that this house, it's like a museum. Every corner reminds me of Mom, of the past. It's hard for me to be there. I took a closer look at my son. Isn't it just about money and convenience? You've never talked about it, I said. Would you have understood? Noel grinned sadly. You've always been so attached to home, to things, to memories. And I want to move on, a fresh start. I've been thinking, maybe I really hadn't tried to understand my son's motives. Maybe there was more behind his desire to sell the house than a desire for comfort. I can understand that, I said. But you could have just explained instead of planning it behind my back. You wouldn't have agreed anyway, Noel objected. You never agree with anything I suggest. That's because you don't suggest it. You put it in front of me, I said. Like with the house. Like the golden autumn. Would you have agreed if I just suggested it? Noel asked hesitantly. Probably not, I admitted. But we would have had a chance to compromise. Instead, you decided to take a detour. And the result is that the deal is off. I'm out of the house, and we barely speak. Noel ran a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. What do we do now? He asked. For starters, accept the situation as it is, I answered. I'm not going home, Noel, and I'm not going to Golden Autumn. I'm going to live my life as I see fit. And the house? What am I going to do about home? I've been thinking. The house that had been the center of my life for almost 50 years. The place where Noel was born, where Lydia died. The center of so many memories, both good and bitter. Do what you think is right, I finally said. It's your house now. Sell it if you want to start over. I won't stand in the way anymore. Noel looked at me in disbelief. Really? You won't mind selling? No, I shook my head. I realize something important these days. A house is just walls. Memories will stay with me wherever I go. I didn't expect that, Noel admitted. I thought you'd fight to the last man. I did, I smiled, but not for the house, for the right to decide how I wanted to live my life. Noel nodded, as if he'd finally realized something. Are you really going to sell the collection? The one you've been collecting all your life? Yes, I said firmly. It's time to move on. Like you said, a fresh start. Noel stared at me for a long moment, then suddenly smiled. You know, you always knew how to surprise me, Father. Just when I think I've anticipated what you're going to do, you do something completely unexpected. Keeps me on my toes, I grinned, to keep life from being boring. We both laughed, and the tension in the air dissipated a little. Will you let me take some things out of the house? I asked. Personal items, pictures, books? Sure, Noel nodded. Come back anytime, or I can bring it over if you tell me exactly what you need. Thank you. I'll think about it and make a list. Noel stood up, getting ready to leave. Father, he hesitated, I still think you'd be better off in a specialized facility, but I respect your decision, even if I don't agree with it. That's all I ask. I stood up as well. Respect for my choice. We hugged awkwardly, which had rarely happened in recent years. Noel was tense but didn't pull away. Progress. When he left, Ambrose walked out of the house. He delicately left us alone to talk. How's it going? He asked, sitting down beside me on the veranda. Did he convince you to come back? No, I shook my head. But we seem to have found some kind of understanding. He's agreed to honor my decision. And you're really going to sell the collection? Ambrose looked at me carefully. Yes, I answered, but not the whole thing. Ambrose raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I smiled. I had an idea. The appraiser is coming tomorrow, and I want him to look at certain pieces, the rarest and most valuable. Their sale should bring enough for my plans. And the rest of the collection? I looked at my old friend. Remember when you asked about my plans? What I'm going to do next? I remember, Ambrose nodded, and you said you didn't know. Now I do. I took a deep breath. I want to send the rest of the collection to Noel, as a gift, as a reminder that I always loved him, even if I didn't know how to show it. Ambrose rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Do you think he'll appreciate it? He's never been much interested in geology. It's not about geology, I shook my head. It's that it was a part of me, something I lived and breathed. I want him to have something to remember me by when I'm gone. Will you tell him about it? No, I smiled. Let it be a surprise. I'll send the package after I leave. You will? Ambrose looked surprised. So you're really going to leave Jackson? Yes, I nodded. Too many memories, too much pain. I want to start over while there's still time. Ambrose was silent for a long moment, then he put his hand on my shoulder. Where will you go? I haven't decided yet, I said. Arizona, maybe, or Colorado, somewhere with mountains and clean air, somewhere I can feel free. Will you write? Sure, I smiled. And come visit if you'll let me. I'd always be glad to. Ambrose shook my hand firmly. And you know what? I'm proud of you, old devil. Not everyone our age would dare to make such a change. I looked out at the garden, at the sun setting, at the peaceful picture of suburban life. Life is too short to spend it in regret, I said, even if you're 73. The next day, the appraiser arrived, my former colleague, Raymond Pierce, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years. He inspected the collection with professional interest, looking especially closely at the specimens I had singled out for sale. "Edward, this is impressive," he said, looking at a large uncut aquamarine from Brazil. "Such specimens are rarely found in private collections. And that tanzanite, amazing color. How much do you think all this could be worth?" I asked, pointing to the specimens that had been selected for sale. Raymond thought for a moment, looking over the stones and making notes in his notebook. "It's hard to say for sure without a detailed appraisal of each specimen," he finally answered. "But given the rarity of some of the specimens and their preservation, I'd say about $120,000. Maybe more if you find the right buyer." The amount was more than I'd expected. I was hoping for a lot less. "Are you sure?" I asked again. "Absolutely," Raymond nodded. "The prices of rare minerals have risen considerably in recent years. Collectors are willing to pay a premium for specimens like yours, especially if there's documentation of their provenance." "There is documentation," I confirmed, "for every specimen." "Then the price could be even higher." Raymond closed his notebook. "Do you really want to sell them, Edward? This is the work of a lifetime." "Yes," I answered firmly. It was time to move on. Raymond nodded understandingly. "I can help with the sale. I have contacts among serious collectors who would appreciate the quality of your specimens." "I'd appreciate it," I shook his hand. "And one more favor, Raymond. This has to stay between us. Noel must not know about the real value of the collection." Raymond looked at me curiously, but didn't ask any questions. "Whatever you say, Edward. Confidentiality is part of our profession." After Raymond left, I sat by the window, picking through the remaining stones, the ones that had been intended for Noel. Some of them were valuable too, but their value was more sentimental than monetary. Each one associated with a particular period of my life, a particular expedition or discovery. I imagined Noel receiving this collection after I left. Would he understand its significance? Would he appreciate the effort I had put into collecting it? Or would he just set it aside as another unnecessary gift from a father who never understood him? The thought hurt, but I let it go. My decision had been made. I will give this parting gift regardless of how it is received. It's my way of saying what I've never been able to put into words. The month flew by. Flagstaff turned out to be exactly as I had hoped, a small, cozy town surrounded by mountains and pine forests. My apartment on the second floor of an old brick building, a few blocks from the historic center, quickly began to feel like home. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room with windows overlooking the San Francisco mountains, a small kitchen, everything you need for a quiet life. I spent the first few weeks settling in and familiarizing myself with the city. I found the nearest supermarket, library, park for morning walks. I bought the missing furniture, dishes, bookshelves. Gradually, the empty apartment began to take on details that made it mine. Photos on the walls, geological maps in frames, a couple of stones from the part of the collection I hadn't sold or sent to Noel. The neighbors turned out to be friendly. A young family with a child upstairs and an elderly couple downstairs. They said hello when they met, but didn't impose themselves on me with conversation, which suited me just fine. I was used to solitude and wasn't looking to make close acquaintances. In the middle of the month, I received a letter from Ambrose. He wrote that the package for Noel had been delivered as we had planned, and that his son had called to ask about me. Ambrose, following our agreement, said that I was doing well, getting settled in my new place, and would be sure to contact myself when I was ready. This news gave me mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was glad that Noel had gotten the collection and that it must have interested him, since he had called Ambrose. On the other hand, somewhere deep inside, I hoped that my son would find a way to contact me without waiting for me to call, but I didn't. Every day I picked up the phone, dialed a few digits of a familiar number, and put it back down. What could I say? "Hey, son, how did you like my present? Did you find the note? Did you understand what I wanted to say?" Words seemed empty, unable to convey all that had accumulated over the years of silence. Instead, I immersed myself in my new life. I joined the local mineral club, where mostly retired people like me gathered. I found a small part-time job as a consultant at the Geology Museum at Northern Arizona University. 3 days a week, 4 hours each. Not for the money, but to occupy my time and feel useful. The rest of the days I walked around the neighborhood, read, and sometimes took field trips to the Grand Canyon or other natural attractions in the region. I loved watching the tourists, their delighted faces at the sight of the majestic scenery. Sometimes I caught myself furtively explaining the geologic history of the canyon to casual listeners, as I had once done for Noel on our rare trips together. On one such day, returning home from an excursion to Walnut Canyon National Park, I found a note at the door. The house manager was informing me that I had a visitor who did not introduce himself, but said he would stop by tomorrow. I reread the note several times. Who could it be? I didn't know anyone in Flagstaff close enough for them to pay me surprise visits. The thought of Noel crossed my mind, but I dismissed it immediately. My son didn't know my exact address. I'd only given him the city. The evening passed in restlessness. I slept badly, listening to every rustle. In the morning, I forced myself to follow the usual routine: breakfast, reading the newspaper, a walk to the nearest park. He returned home at 11, showered, and sat in a chair by the window with a book, glancing at his watch every now and then. At exactly noon, there was a knock on the door. I got up slowly, pulled on my shirt, and went to open it, feeling my heart beating in my throat. Noel stood on the doorstep, a shrunken man with light stubble on his face, wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans, not at all like the impeccably dressed lawyer I'd known him to be. In his hands, he held a familiar carved wooden box. "Hello, Father," he said quietly. I couldn't say a word. I just stood there holding onto the door jamb, staring at the sun I hadn't expected to see again. "Can I come in?" Noel asked after a pause. I stepped back silently, letting him into the apartment. He looked around, noticing the bookshelves, already half filled, the pictures on the walls, the geologic maps. "It's cozy," he said. "Do you like it here?" "Yes," I finally found my voice. "It's peaceful. How did you find me?" "Ambrose gave me the address," Noel admitted. "Not right away, though. At first he tried to talk me out of going, said you'd contact me when you were ready. But then he hesitated. Then I showed him this." Noel picked up the box he was still holding. "My mineral collection box. I got it a week after you left," he continued. "I opened it and—" His voice trembled. "Father, why? Why didn't you tell me?" I sighed and pointed to the couch. "Let's sit down." We settled on the couch, the box lying between us. I ran my hand over the carved pattern on the lid. Scenes from Greek mythology, carved by a craftsman from Salem I'd met on one of my expeditions. "I didn't know how to say it," I finally replied. Words had never been my strong suit, especially when it came to feelings. "But this collection—" Noel shook his head. "I never realized how valuable it was to you. Not just in monetary terms, although I consulted an expert, and he said some of the specimens are worth thousands of dollars. But that's not the point, is it? Every stone is a part of your life." "Yes," I nodded. "Each one is associated with a particular place, a time, a memory. This one," I carefully pulled a piece of malachite out of the box. "I found the day I found out my mom and I were having a baby. And this one," I pointed to a small amethyst, "I brought back from my last expedition before you were born." Noel stared at the stones, his eyes wide with surprise and something else, maybe regret. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I never asked about the history of the stones." "And I never told you," I answered. "My fault as much as yours." We were silent for a moment. The Arizona sun was shining brightly through the window, the clock was ticking on the table, and there were children playing outside. "I found your note," Noel said at last. "For your favorite son. Cherish these stones as I cherish the memories of you. Dad." He recited from memory without looking in the box. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Why didn't you ever tell me you loved me?" Noel asked suddenly. His voice sounded almost childlike, with the same vulnerability he'd felt 30 years ago. "I thought you knew," I answered, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thought it was obvious. Not to a kid who sees his father 2 months out of the year." Noel shook his head. Not for a teenager whose interests seem unworthy of his father's attention. I've made a lot of mistakes, son, I admitted. The biggest one was not knowing how to show you how much I loved you. Noel looked at me for a long moment, then suddenly smiled. You know, I started studying these stones. I bought books, consulted with experts. I wanted to understand why they were so important to you. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Really? Yeah, he nodded. And I realized something. Realized that each of these stones isn't just a mineral. It's a story, a moment frozen in time. Like a photograph, only, deeper, older. They took millions of years to form before you found them. Exactly, I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Every stone is a witness to the history of the earth, and a piece of my history too. I began to understand, Noel continued, why geology fascinated you so much. It's not just the science of rocks. It's a way of touching eternity, something bigger than ourselves. Yes, I nodded, surprised by his insight. That's what I tried to explain to you when I took you on those rare expeditions. I thought you just wanted me to follow in your footsteps, Noel admitted. To be a geologist like you. No, I shook my head. I wanted you to find your passion, something that would make you feel alive. For me, it was geology. For you, I thought it would be music. Noel shuddered. Do you remember? My music? Of course, I smiled. You were talented, but I was afraid. Scared that you would choose an unsustainable profession, that you would struggle to survive, that you wouldn't be able to support yourself and your future family. It was a selfish fear. I had to support your dream. Noel looked at me with surprise. I never thought I'd hear you make such a confession. I've had a lot of time to think, I spread my hands. Here, away from everything that had been our life in Jackson, I could finally see my mistakes clearly. I've made some too, Noel said, especially in the last few years. The way Pearl and I treated you. Forget it, I said with a wave of my hand. What's past is past. No, Noel said firmly. I have to say it. We were wrong, selfish, thinking only of ourselves, of our own comfort, putting you down instead of finding a solution together. I kept quiet, letting him talk. After you left, Pearl and I talked about it a lot, Noel continued. She realized what we'd done was wrong too. We decided not to sell the house, at least not yet. But you wanted a fresh start, didn't you? Move downtown? Yes, I did, Noel nodded. But then I got your collection. I saw the note, started going through the stones, reading your notes, looking at the pictures, and I realized that the house I was in such a hurry to sell wasn't just walls. It's part of our history, our family. I was touched by his words, but I still had my doubts. What about Pearl? She dreamed of a new apartment, hadn't she? Pearl understood, Noel smiled weakly. After you left, the house was empty, quiet. We both realized how much you meant to this place, and how wrong we'd been to try to kick you out. I didn't know what to say. Those words are what I've wanted to hear all these years. An acknowledgement that I mattered, that I wasn't just an old man they wanted to get rid of. Thank you, I finally said. But you don't have to feel guilty or change your plans because of me. It's not just for you, Noel shook his head. It's for me too. I realized I wasn't ready to part with this place, our home, the memories of my mom, of my childhood, of our family as it once was. I took a good look at my son. He'd changed over the month. There was a new depth in his eyes and understanding that wasn't there before. What do you plan to do next? I asked. Noel sighed. Live, work. Maybe, he stammered, maybe go back to music. As a hobby, not as a profession. I just bought a guitar, first one in 20 years. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. Music has always been your calling. What about you? Noel looked me in the eye. Are you going to stay here? In Flagstaff? I wondered. Over the course of this month, I'd gotten used to my new life, my freedom and independence. But was I truly happy? I don't know, I answered honestly. It's good here. It's peaceful. I found a part-time job at the University Museum, made some acquaintances. But sometimes I miss Jackson. The house? Noel asked cautiously. The house, I nodded. Lydia's garden, My library. Ambrose, I paused. And you, son? Noel swallowed. You could have come back, he said quietly. The house is still yours, father. Always has been, and always will be. What about Pearl? I asked doubtfully. Pearl understood, Noel repeated. She wants you back too. We both miss you. I was silent, digesting his words. Back in Jackson, back to the house where my whole life had been, to live with Noel and Pearl again, after everything that had happened. I don't know if we can live together again, I said finally. Too much water has passed. There's too much resentment on both sides. I understand, Noel nodded, but we could try, in a different way, with respect for each other, with open communication, instead of glossing over problems. Maybe. I wasn't ready to give a definite answer. I need to think about it, Noel. It's a big decision. Of course, he didn't insist. I don't expect an answer right now. Just know that you can always come back when you're ready. We sat there for several more hours talking about everything: his work, my life in Flagstaff, the mineral collection, Pearl, the house. For the first time in years, we talked sincerely, without hidden resentments or innuendos. By the time Noel was about to leave, it was starting to get dark. Where are you staying? I asked. In a hotel near the center, Noel answered. I leave tomorrow afternoon. You could stay here, I suggested. There's a spare room. Noel smiled. Thank you, Father, but I've already paid for the room. Next time, if you invite me. I will, I nodded. We hugged awkwardly at the door. I could feel my son's heart beating quickly, nervously. My own was pounding just as hard. I'll call you when I get back to Jackson, Noel said, pulling away, and I'll wait for your decision. No pressure, I promise. Thank you, son, I squeezed his shoulder, for coming, for talking to me, and for, understood. You're the one who made me understand, Noel smiled, with your gift, your note. When the door closed behind him, I stood in the hallway for a long moment, digesting everything that had happened. Then I went back into the living room and sat down in front of the collection box Noel had left on the table. I opened it and saw the familiar stones, the photos, the notes, all the things I'd sent my son as a final parting gift. But it wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of a new phase of our relationship. I picked up the phone and dialed Ambrose's number. He answered after the third ring. Ambrose Nightingale speaking. It's me, Eddie, I said. Noel's been coming over. I know, you old devil, Ambrose laughed. I gave him your address. I hope you're not mad. No, I smiled. On the contrary, thank you. And how did it go? Good, I answered. Better than I could have hoped. We, talked. For real. Ambrose sounded impatient. And he asked me to come back, I said. To Jackson, to our house. And you? I said I'd think about it. Ambrose chuckled. And what did you decide? I looked out the window at the mountains painted pink by the setting sun, at my new apartment, already so cozy, at the collection box, the symbol of my life. I don't know, I answered honestly. Part of me wants to go back, to see the house, Lydia's garden, my library, to be closer to my son, to you. But the other part is afraid that things will go back to the way they were, that we'll start drifting apart again, that we won't understand each other. Life is a risk, Eddie, Ambrose said philosophically. Always has been and always will be. The question is, are you willing to risk it for a chance at a real relationship with your son? I was silent for a long moment, pondering his words. Then I smiled. You know what, old friend? I think I'm ready. Maybe not right away. Maybe not forever. But I'm willing to give it a try. That's right, Ambrose approved. And if anything goes wrong, my guest room is always at your disposal. Thank you, I laughed. You're a true friend. I sat at the window again, staring out at the fading sunset. Thoughts of the future were no longer frightening. No matter what happened, returning to Jackson or continuing to live in Flagstaff, I knew I was no longer alone. I have a son who is finally beginning to understand me. I have a friend who is there for me in times of need. And there was myself, no longer the resentful old man who had run away from his problems, but a man ready to build a new relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The decision was not yet finalized, but for the first time in many years I felt peace. The stone lying on my heart was gone, replaced by lightness and hope. And no matter what path I chose next, I knew that my life had a new meaning. I took an aquamarine from the shelf, one of the few stones I had kept, and held it up to the light. Blue, pure, perfect. A symbol of a new beginning. Just as this little piece of earth had gone through millions of years of transformation to become a work of nature's art, so my relationship with my son could transform through pain and misunderstanding into something genuine and precious. For your beloved son, I whispered, remembering my note, the words that changed everything.